You called it something like thinking. Let's say it was primarily a mode of transport, like a train, that it moved smoothly, was transparent, that we could see the details of the women's dresses as they smoothed their hands over twill or silk, cotton, wool, that the surface was as phallic as a monorail. Or you could use it like a bullet to slip in your jacket pocket just for touch. That is, remember what it's meant to do. But this is a slipperier invention. Even in the absence of muscle tone, still the insisting flame, the way it demands to make itself known, to lead to what cannot be followed. Here, it demands that we give up the beginning, not look back. There could be words about the sound of the fountain, or the small concentric rings of light as late they fall on paper. But really, that's not it, is it? It's closer even, closer to the body. Here we abandon years of insistent rhythm just to hear it, but not its sound. Can we be quiet enough together now to hear it, and not break it?
Welcome, Sarah
Hi,
Maclay,
Amanda.
to Poetry.LA. It's so lovely to have you here, not only to talk about your work, which we will get into, but the fact that we've known each other for 10 years, and we met in a small classroom at LMU when I was an undergrad, so a long time ago it feels like now. And so it's just such a pleasure and a gift and an honor to be talking to you today and spending some time with your work.
Likewise, I love the circularity of it.
The Glass Sonata, the first time you read it through just now, it really struck me just how textural it is and how it really invites the reader in to all these different images and places. And it seems both vulnerable, but yet also out looking in a certain way. So I was wondering just how this poem came to be. Was the intention to really invite the reader in? Was the intention to excite the reader with these images? Where did it start
You
from?
know, I never think too much about that. I mean, I'm hoping all of my poems are inviting in some way. This one is a poem that I think of more as an ars poetica. If anybody in the audience isn't familiar with that term, it's like the art of poetry as someone conceives of it in a certain moment of time, because, you know, it can change. And this was a poem that I wrote toward the beginning of the majority of the poems that ended up in Nightfall Marginalia, which is my most recent full-length collection. And I was also influenced by some of the poems I was reading and hearing, and really wanting to move into poems that emerged from a more interior place. I'm going to be reading in a moment, in contrast, a poem where those insistent rhythms that I'm kind of banishing in that poem are really prevalent, but it's really fun to read. So, you know, it's not like you have to write in one particular way. But this was a way of really sort of thinking about, and thinking about, as here is not ever exactly the right word, but thinking about feeling out, you know, what aspirationally a poem might be for me, you know, what it might emerge from, what it might open to, invite someone into, in a way, as a kind of consciousness more than anything. and one where you, I mean, I've always said this, I've said this in many classes with you, I'm sure, that if you know what your poem is going to be about before you start writing it, it's usually going to be stillborn. And there's no point, kind of, because there's no discovery. I mean, I think it was Frost who said, no discovery for the writer, no discovery for the reader. And I think that always rings true for me. So, but even more than that in this poem, as it continued, it's articulating this sort of mystery of trusting the thread enough not to have to either look back or know exactly where you're going.
Yeah, I think that really rings true with this. It sort of led itself more and more into these different like realms, worlds, images, questions that sort of, for me at least, drove the poem for me as the reader, which was so lovely to be a part of. It reminded me of, and I guess it was called a Viewmaster back in the 90s or 80s, where these different images, and earlier, where all these different images would pop up and you would click through, and it sort of reminded me of that. It all sort of felt cohesive, but we also got these different moments that were individual and could stand alone.
And after the few opening lines, when it moves into that imagery, you know me, that's always part of what I'm going for in poems, because I learned from workshopping that images were really powerful, and I had to try to understand what they even were, because it was initially confusing for me. So these specific things come up that you can visualize in this case.
Yeah, some of them are so striking, that the surface was as phallic as a monorail and slipperier invention. And there's just so many fantastic lines that are whimsical, but not in too much of a childlike way, but just enough where it's bringing a sense of lightness and airiness to some of the images, which is really lovely.
And I was somebody who, at the age of 6, went to the Seattle World's Fair and loved it. And that was when they unveiled the monorail.
Oh, wow.
And we wrote on it. And so, I think the wording isn't exact in this poem, because the image that I was going for really was not the track itself, but the
I got that when I read it. That's exactly the image I was picturing.
If you get too bulky, then it doesn't flow right. So I'm glad that it worked for you.
No, it did. That's exactly what I was picturing. I thought that was so interesting.
But it's very phallic, but it's very smooth. It's gliding, kind of above land on this track.
In terms of Ars Poeticas, and I'm sure we both know this as poets, they sort of, when you look back on them, they really sort of almost capture, like little time capsule, a certain area of writing, even if it wasn't necessarily encapsulating a collection. It might have just been a period of time in life. Was there something about this Ars Poetica that you felt like captured either where you were or this collection? Or
Well, I mean, I was writing it in Holiday's hut. In Venice, I lived behind my friend Holiday in a converted garage for a number of years. Very tropical, lots of bamboo and bougainvillea, and an outdoor shower and tub and bathroom across the courtyard. So that was where this, and many of the poems in Nightfall Marching were written there, not all of them. It was, there had been quite a bit of shifting by that point in certain strands of my personal life that would continue to shift, and in some ways open up anew in ways that I had maybe hoped for but hadn't thought possible. But this was just a place where it really was about a sense of my poetics in that moment. I was most excited by, in reading other people, poets who it seemed to me were doing something like what this, I don't know if it describes it, evokes, maybe, if I'm lucky.
And I think that's so common for us writers, that we're all part of this big long vine and leaves, and we all come from something else. And so I think it's sometimes magical when something strikes us and we know it came from somewhere, even if we can't name it. But when we can name it, it's even all the more exciting when it happens. Well, thank you so much for sharing that one.
The place where everything changes. I had to lie on your bed just once. It was wide and solid, and I didn't want to leave. I stared at the crystals arranged harmonically on windowsills, imagined the shower I'd never take in the handmade outdoor glassed-in stall as you played. You sat me down so decently on the dim-lit couch, removed your glasses, rubbed the spot where they straddled your nose, and closed your eyes for a second as your face changed. Somehow I gathered myself and we walked into the night of the rose trees and the roaring willow, and I still managed to hope the finality of that last embrace was something else as you threw me gallantly around to face the shrubs etched into the hill like a negative lit by the full moon. I chased down the PCH, already guarding that harsh nugget of fact as desire was peeled like the strip of a perfectly spiraled apple that blows out of the car.
I will say I've always been so interested in the arena of poems that really deal with memory. I think some of my favorite pieces, authors, everything I have dog-eared in books really are trying to capture memory. Memory just really drives my writing and the writing I'm interested in. So I was biased, but when I came across this piece, it was so honest and it was so beautifully constructed and light, but also has so much depth to it that I just was taken by it. I mean, we can just go to the end. There's one line that I just love so much when you said, already guarding that harsh nugget of fact. I think that really hits you like a train as the reader, because it's such a fantastic line that I don't think I've heard before, but that everyone has experienced before. But I think there's something about your choice in diction that really just captures that feeling so well. So, I mean, this is a question I know poets don't often like, and you don't have to name names, but if you could just more paint us a picture of this moment and this person, or even if you don't want to talk about the person, maybe yourself at this time.
I mean, I can talk a little bit about it. And it was written very quickly after this happened. So it wasn't a distant memory. It was fairly fresh. And it was a way of kind of coping with this, feeling of loss that had occurred, because I realized, as I think the poem makes clear, we were really on different pages about what we were even thinking about with each other, as happens. He was someone I met at a restaurant where he was a waiter in Santa Monica, very attractive guy to my eye, and he was also a musician, which is where the whole thing about the playing comes in. And the one time we got together, we ended up going to his place after. I don't even remember what we did before, maybe eating, I don't know, but or maybe I just drove out there. And it was a really interesting, unique place. It was between Santa Monica and Malibu, somewhere on the coast. And, by the end of the evening, he'd made it clear that there was no interest in a relationship or anything like that. And thus the feeling in the last stanza. So, it was, it wasn't a long-term thing. It was fairly short-lived, but it was just one of those moments of registering disappointment and, the outsized feeling of initial devastation of that. In the course of a lifetime, it's not that uncommon to go through things like this, but it was just disappointing. One thing that this poem is doing, which the first poem wasn't, is in the Glass Sonata, when I talk about those insistent rhythms, this one really does have insistent rhythms. And I think it was part of the way the poem was able to come out. And it's really fun to read, I have to say. So even though, I was wanting to move toward the Glass Sonata territory, by the second decade of the 21st century. It's not the only kind of thing I've done or do, depends on the poem. The other thing that I noticed today when I was looking at this poem, which I was glad to find, was the line breaks seem to be organized kind of like a shot list. There's something cinematic about it. So, like in that second stanza, you sat me down so decently on the dim-lit couch, removed your glasses, rubbed the spot where they straddled your nose, and closed your eyes for a second as your face changed. You could imagine a series of camera angles, capturing each of those microcosms
That
of
makes
that
so
moment.
much, I was going to say that makes so much sense because it felt cinematic when reading it.
Great.
And I think nowadays, not that so much of the fantastic work that's being put out in the world dealing with things at large is important. I think I personally sometimes find so much solace and inspiration and what's the word I'm looking for? Just warmth and home and when you find personal things by poets. And I think that even if something is personal, it's made to be shared.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there was something about this piece that felt like I was watching something unfold. And the way you constructed, like you said, in terms of rhythm and your line breaks, that those images really just stand by themselves and give it pause. And we're able to just see these clips go by,
And
but still
it's
be
a
present.
narrative, which not all of my poems really move in that direction exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So you can follow it in that way too.
Mm-hmm.
There's just enough remove in the middle of essentially the rawness of it for me to be able to at least write down what Eliot would call the objective correlatives of these moments. And I'm thinking a little bit as we're talking about Helen Wendler's theory. You might remember this from the book, about one of the places a lyric poem will emerge from in particular is a moment of disruption, essentially, in the way one's living. And sometimes they're good and sometimes they're not. But sometimes I think of it as it's almost like there's a little earthquake. And so there's this fault line that is opened up. And the act of writing the poem is part of what tries to bring the earth back together. Or, if you think about it as a wound, I often think back to, I've never seen this in real life, but I know it's happened in real life, the using of leeches in hospitals and
I've heard of
to draw poison out.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of the things that poems also do often for us. And then once you've got it out there, it's kind of like you've got it in this little urn and you can look at it again and it doesn't have to keep circulating all through your body. So there's a feeling of, relief. Yeah. But it's right there if you ever want to go back to that moment. And I think that's part of where the imagery can be really a powerful way of, it like provides this lattice that you can kind of fall through. Where, I remember that and that and that and that and that. But the other thing that's great about it is when you've got those little urns that have helped you, they can also help other people sometimes.
So on to the next.
Okay. So we're going back to Nightfall Marginalia now. This is out from the wonderful What Books Press, Topanga. It's drowning upside down in stars because your skirt flew up, reversing gravity. Constellations lace you loose as jewels, as these rare bijoux. Dream of weightless arms of fins in backstroke flow. Elegantly awkward in your improv. Floating through abandoned weeds in humid déjà vu. Grass just wet with dew in barefoot midnight. He lifts you in the dark as you turn together under stars. Is the clover the stars? Are the stars the clover? Lap to rest his head to see Arcturus through the leaves, oh. Morgan Street for miles, no thought of noon. Never will hordes of moths attack his hands if you hold them. Past the cemetery lit by his firefly lantern book. Questions settle into skin, no longer a mirage. Slip out the door of your own soiree with him. Who was he with? 21st solstice, brand new birthday body, summer singing. Under the leaves, his eyes are enough. Virtuoso, he'll say, my dear virtuoso, is it strange to say, I'm proud of thee? Walk past the edges of town to the place where the night is curved. You need to take yourself seriously. Decades to absorb. Zodiac is cousin of the clover, the alfalfa. After midnight, when the field becomes a fleeting waltz, X-ray your heart and you'll find the dogwood, the redbud. This is a poem that is organized basically as an abecedarian, which means every line starts with a different consecutive letter of the alphabet. But then because I like to make these things less obvious, I skewed it so that the first letter is B. Then the A is after the Z, and then the X is in a different location. I had been trying to write a poem since the late 70s about this walk from the place I was living at Oberlin on my 21st birthday to the cemetery with Franz Wright, who was there at the time. He's a little bit older than me. And he was there in the summer too. He came to my party and we left my party together and took this long walk down these streets. It's a poem that I wrote without periods, without commas, sometimes extra space. And so it's kind of like a list poem in a series of fragments that are memories from or later thoughts about this night.
You know, reading it first and then you letting me know afterwards what it was about, I think it has enough of the essence of maybe that memory for yourself and then also for the reader, but I think it also does such a beautiful job of distorting it just slightly, sort of like a kaleidoscope almost.
Yeah.
Where we get these like little pixelations of maybe
Yeah.
and tastes of what it was, but we're left with just these individual lines that could also stand alone and be so strong and just really resonate.
Yeah.
So
I like your characterization of it as kaleidoscopic. That's great.
So before we end off with our outro reading a last poem, I thought it would be fun to ask you some questions. We sort of have the wonderful relationship of 10 years in our back pocket, so it might be interesting to sort of focus on questions that might eventually lead to talking about poetry and being poets, but that maybe are just more cozy and personal. So I'm going to ask you to choose a number between 1 and 3.
Oh gosh. 2.
Okay. What is a place that is ordinary to others, but extraordinary to you because of what happened there?
There are a lot of options for this one, but because of the nature of what we're doing here, I think I want to talk a little bit about the morning that I learned that what would become my first full-length collection had won the prize that would make that possible. In 2003, I was living in this basement apartment at the top of Sierra Bonita, kind of near the Hollywood Hills. It would be called in New York a garden apartment because it was a basement apartment, but there were these big views, big windows that viewed this backyard and trampoline and all these plants and stuff. So I think it was a Saturday morning, it was certainly a morning that I didn't have to dash across town to teach somewhere. And I was waking up and I got this call from Richard Matthews. He told me that I had won the Tampa Review Prize for Poetry. It was a phone call. And as I recall it, I don't think I'd even got my sweatpants on yet. It was like I was kind of wandering around the apartment half clothed from sleeping. And so, it's just this little apartment at the bottom of a big house at the top of what became a cul-de-sac at the top of that hill.
That's amazing. And it's wild to think that someone else is living there right now.
Who knows what's going on with that
Yeah.
house now? But it was notable for me because it really marked a big change in the trajectory of my life as a poet in particular, and all the ancillary things that could lead to.
Yeah.
So it having a book out and an MFA, and it was the same year that an essay that I'd been developing in my MFA program was picked up by the Writers' Chronicle. Those were the things, along with the workshop conducting and teaching experience along the way, that allowed me to start teaching at the university level, which I did for 20 years.
Yeah, it's wild how some moments just unlock a totally different
Yeah.
notch in a
And
timeline.
then the other thing was it was the kind of contract where they wanted first access to your next manuscript. So my first 3 collections came from University of Tampa Press, and then the last 2 full lengths from What Books Press. But it was the beginning of that kind of ability to get the work out.
Before we end, I do want to say that it is just the privilege of a lifetime to be able to speak with you and sort of
Oh.
eternalize your work in a way. And I can speak for so many other people and just say that you have had a profound, profound impact on my life
Thank you, Amanda.
as a writer and as a person. And I don't know if I would be the poet I am today without having crossed your path. And so just thank you for being you and creating, and have given so much of your life to others and to students, because it changed our own trajectories for.
Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you so much. If you could share one more poem with us, for us.
Thank you, Amanda. It's been my pleasure too. Really nice to see you and share this time with you. This is called Letter Almost Sent, and it's the poem that ends Nightfall Marginalia. You won't like this. Maybe you won't want it. I'm lying here in the dark with my burning candle. Otherwise, it's still. I tried again not to think of you today. It was so cold, even though it's still September, that I had to wear 2 coats. It wasn't quite enough. By nightfall, it was brisk. Leaves already golden, fallen, wet. We walked quickly, my friend and I, from the parking lot to the symphony. I made it nearly to the end of the Rimsky-Korsakov, all the way to that crescendo and quickening, that cymbal crash, and then, in the place where things go suddenly quiet, but alive, into that barely audible, sustained pianissimo pulsing, lingering, exactly like it always is when we're together after, holding each other, exactly like this, but in sound. You must listen. How could it have been composed without this private knowledge, this experience? It was shocking to understand this. I can smell your skin. They say he used to compose while walking along the footbridges between the bulrushes and bending willows, the gardens, and the lake. The Germans leveled the summer house where he wrote it. I so hope you're okay. Don't worry. I know nothing can happen, though this feels so strange. Can't not think of you at night in the ice palace of Veracino. So cliche, I know. Crystalline, deserted, filled with snow. even though we know it wasn't constructed on the steppe, but in a studio lot near Madrid, not far from the airport. The ice made out of cellophane and paraffin, the snow a mix of aspirin powder and soap flakes, just as hard to walk through as real snow, not ours to enter. And anyway, it doesn't exist. Forgive me. P.S. My brother and I spent several hours trimming the apple trees in the yard as sunset flecked its pink and orange against gray. We caught it just in time.